"My body burns for you," she whispered to the Lakota who took her father's life. Western love tales. Emma Caldwell stood at the edge of the ridge, her gaze stretched across the endless stretch of grass and distant hills. She could feel the wind tugging at her hair, whispering secrets she could almost understand. But even the beauty of the land could not soothe the storm inside her heart. Her father, a proud rancher who had taught her everything about horses, cattle, and the land, was gone, taken by violence she could neither comprehend nor forgive. Emma's father had always been a quiet man, strong in ways that did not demand attention. He would rise before the sun, his hands calloused from years of labor, and work the ranch from dawn until dusk. He had taught her to ride before she was 10, showing her how to guide a stubborn horse with gentle commands rather than harsh force. Every morning, she remembered, he would hand her a small loaf of bread or a cup of warm milk, and the smell of leather and hay would fill the air as they worked together. Emma had loved those mornings when the world seemed simple and her father's laughter carried like a melody across the fields. But that laughter had been silenced the night the Lakota came. They were not cruel men by nature, at least, not all of them. But in that fateful raid, her father had become a casualty of a history neither side could entirely control. Emma had hidden behind the barn, her hands pressed against her mouth to stifle the scream that clawed at her throat. She had watched, frozen in horror, as the life was ripped from the man who had given her everything. The details of that night haunted her in fragments. The sound of hooves thundering across the plain, the flash of moonlight on a gun barrel, the low, guttural shouts, and finally, the terrible silence that followed. In the days that came after, the town tried to offer solace, but words fell like dust in the wind. Emma wandered the ranch alone, touching the rough wood of fences and gates that had once been her father's pride. She could almost hear his voice in the rustling of the grass, whispering instructions, reminding her to be careful, to take her time. Yet every memory also burned with anger. How could life be so cruel? How could the very people whose land had once touched hers with neighborly goodwill now be the instruments of her grief? Emma knew she was expected to mourn quietly, to accept the verdict of fate with a stoicism her father would have admired. But grief was not something she could contain in neat, polite boxes. It roared inside her, a fire she could not put out. Nights were the hardest. She would sit by the small stove in the cabin, the embers glowing faintly, and let the tears fall freely, unashamed. Every shadow seemed to hold a memory, every sound a reminder of what she had lost. And yet, somewhere beneath the sorrow, something else flickered, a strange, unsettling curiosity, an ache she did not yet understand. It was on one of these nights, when the wind carried voices from the distant hills, that she first saw him. She had been riding along the edge of the creek, trying to let the rhythm of the horse calm her mind, when a figure appeared in the distance. At first she thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow shaped by the swaying reeds. But as she drew closer, she realized he was real, a man of the Lakota, tall and strong with eyes that seemed to hold both sorrow and fire. He did not look like a killer. He looked like someone who carried his own burdens, someone whose soul was familiar with loss. Emma's heart betrayed her before her mind could catch up. She wanted to turn away, to flee, to reject him outright. And yet, there was something magnetic in his presence, a force she could not name. He dismounted his horse carefully, his movements deliberate and respectful, as if he understood the fragile state of the world around him. There was a moment of stillness, a heartbeat suspended in the space between fear and fascination. Neither spoke. Words seemed inadequate, too simple for the weight of what hung between them. Days turned into weeks, and the man appeared again and again at the edges of her life. Sometimes she saw him hunting in the far fields, sometimes sitting by the river, sketching the land in charcoal and ink. Each encounter was brief, but each left a mark she could not erase. Emma's anger, though still present, began to twist into something more complicated. She hated what he represented, the pain, the loss, but she could not hate him completely. There was a gentleness in the way he moved, a care for the land and the creatures on it that reminded her of her father. It was in this slow, reluctant recognition that Emma felt the stirrings of a feeling she had never expected. She found herself watching him more than she should, noticing the subtle arch of his brow, the way sunlight caught the curve of his jaw, the steady calm in his eyes. Her body, which had been wrapped tightly in grief, seemed to respond to him in ways she could neither explain nor deny. She knew it was dangerous, foolish even, to allow such feelings to grow. After all, he had taken her father from her. Yet she could not force her heart to obey reason. The tension between them grew like a storm on the horizon, unseen, yet inevitable. One afternoon she confronted him. Her hands trembled as she gripped the reins, her voice sharp with emotion. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her eyes searching his for an answer that could make sense of the impossible. He met her gaze steadily, without flinching, without apology. "I did not mean for your father to die," he said softly. "The past is a weight I carry, but it is not all I am. I am more than the man you see before you now." His words were calm, measured, but they struck her like lightning. She wanted to scream at him, to turn and ride away, yet she stayed rooted, hearing the truth in his voice even as her heart rebelled. It was in that moment, standing on the ridge with the wind tearing through her hair, that Emma felt the first undeniable flicker of something she could not name. It was not love, not yet. It was anger, sorrow, fascination, and a strange, dangerous longing all tangled together. Her body burned in ways that frightened her, a raw ache that seemed to defy everything she had known about grief and hate. She wanted to deny it, to fight it, but the feeling was relentless, impossible to ignore. For the first time since her father's death, Emma realized that life was not just about what was lost. It was also about what could be found, even in the most unlikely of places. And though she could not yet forgive, and though she could not yet love, she knew that this man, this Lakota stranger who had entered her life like a wildfire, would change everything. As the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the prairie, Emma turned her horse toward home, her thoughts a tangle of fear, longing, and uncertainty. The wind carried a whisper across the fields, and she imagined it spoke of the future, of challenges and choices she was not yet ready to face. But deep within her, a spark had ignited, a spark that would not be easily extinguished, no matter how the world tried. The plains were quiet, but the story of Emma Caldwell and the man who had shattered and awakened her heart was only just beginning. The days that followed were filled with a restless tension that neither Emma nor the Lakota man could fully understand. She told herself she wanted nothing to do with him. After all, he had come into her life as the embodiment of her pain. He had taken her father from her, and she should despise him entirely. But reality proved stubborn. Every time she looked across the plains, her eyes seemed to seek him out, as though the land itself was drawing them together. He called himself Mato, a name that meant bear in his language. Emma had learned this one evening when he approached her cautiously near the creek. The way he spoke, slow and deliberate, suggested respect. There was a calm authority in him, not the kind that demanded obedience, but the kind that invited understanding. When he said his name, his voice carried weight, as though it had survived the harshest storms. At first, Emma kept her distance. She rode along paths she had known since childhood, circling the same fields, checking fences, and feeding the animals. Mato appeared often, yet always at the periphery, careful not to disturb her world. Sometimes she would catch glimpses of him standing silently by the tree line, bow in hand, or watching the horses graze. There was something mesmerizing in his stillness, a kind of patience that reminded her of her father. Yet even with this strange familiarity, a storm of anger still raged inside her. One afternoon, the storm came to a head. Emma had been repairing a fence when she noticed Mato moving closer than usual. Her heart raced, not from fear alone but from something she could not define. She slammed the hammer down and the sound echoed across the plain. "Why are you always here?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of frustration and fear. Mato's gaze was calm, unwavering. He did not flinch under her anger. "I am here because you are here," he said simply. His words were measured, but there was a quiet insistence in them that unsettled her. "I am not your enemy," he added, as though anticipating her response before it came. Emma's hands shook, gripping the fence post as she fought to keep her composure. "You killed my father," she shouted. "How can you say that you are not my enemy?" The wind picked up, tugging at her hair and clothing as though nature itself had joined the argument. Mato lowered his eyes for a moment, the lines of grief on his face deepening. "I did not plan it," he said quietly. "I do not take life lightly. Your father, he was brave, honorable. I respected him." He paused, and Emma could see the struggle in his expression. "I do not ask you to forgive me. I do not ask you to trust me. But know this, I carry the weight of what happened every day." Emma felt a strange ache as she looked at him. His words did not erase the pain, nor did they lessen her anger, but they planted a seed of something she could not yet name. It was as if the wind itself had shifted, carrying a whisper of understanding she had not expected to hear. She turned her gaze to the fields, unable to meet his eyes, but inside, a subtle curiosity began to grow. Over the next few weeks, their encounters became more frequent, though still cautious. Mato would appear at dawn, sometimes helping with the horses or carrying supplies, always silent, never imposing. Emma watched him work, noting the ease with which he handled the animals, the careful attention he gave to every task. There was a grace in his movements that reminded her of her father, and with each passing day, the anger inside her became more complicated. It no longer existed alone. It intertwined with admiration, confusion, and an undeniable pull she could not ignore. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills and painted the sky with hues of pink and orange, Emma and Mato found themselves working side by side. She was mending a fence, and he was clearing a fallen branch from the path. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was charged, like electricity waiting to spark. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "Why do you stay?" she asked. "Why do you linger in a place that should only remind me of what I've lost?" Mato paused, brushing sawdust from his hands. "Because there is more here than loss," he replied. "There is land, life, and the memory of those we loved. I see your father in the work you do, and it reminds me that life must continue, even after tragedy." His words touched something deep within her, a part of her heart she had kept locked away since that night. She wanted to argue, to deny his insight, but the truth of his words was undeniable. As the days turned into weeks, a fragile connection began to grow. Emma found herself watching Mato when she thought he wasn't looking, noticing the quiet strength in his posture, the gentleness in the way he treated the animals. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to speak to him about things she had never shared with anyone else, her father's stories, the small joys of ranch life, the dreams she had once held for the future. Mato listened without judgment, without interruption. He offered guidance when asked, but never imposed his own will. It was a new kind of trust, fragile and cautious, but real, and with it came a strange, warming sensation she had not felt since her father's death: hope. Yet even as hope grew, fear lingered in the corners of her mind. She knew that opening her heart, even slightly, to the man who had brought so much pain into her life was dangerous. She told herself that she would remain strong, that she would never allow herself to feel anything more than cautious respect. And yet, her body and heart seemed to betray her. She noticed how her pulse quickened when he was near, how a simple touch of his hand could send shivers down her spine. She hated herself for it, hated the confusion that mingled with her grief, yet she could not fight it. One evening, as the sky deepened into shades of violet and gold, Mato approached the cabin with a small bundle of herbs and dried flowers. "For the land," he said softly, offering them to her. His eyes held a vulnerability she had not seen before, and for the first time, Emma saw not the man who had taken her father's life, but a human being, carrying his own burdens, seeking a place in a world that had been harsh to him. Emma accepted the bundle, her fingers brushing against his. She felt a spark, fleeting but undeniable. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. For a moment they simply stood there, two souls tethered by grief, curiosity, and a strange, unspoken longing. The nights became harder, as sleep carried dreams she could neither control nor avoid. She saw her father's face, felt the heat of anger, the sting of loss, and yet, intertwined with it, visions of Mato, his calm eyes, his quiet strength, the subtle kindness he showed. Emma woke each morning with her heart pounding, torn between what she should feel and what she could not deny. Winter approached, and the land shifted under the weight of frost and snow. Life on the ranch became more challenging, and Emma realized she could not face it alone. Mato's presence became less optional and more necessary. He helped with the horses, repaired fences, and offered guidance on surviving the harsh cold. She found herself relying on him in ways that surprised her. And though her anger had not disappeared, it no longer consumed her entirely. Instead, it coexisted with something more complex, something that hinted at the possibility of forgiveness, even if she was not ready to name it yet. One cold, clear morning, Emma rode to the ridge alone, the snow crunching under her horse's hooves. She looked out over the land, the trees dusted with frost, the distant hills shimmering in silver light. And there, standing silently as if he had always belonged there, was Mato. No words were exchanged at first. The wind carried their silence across the plains, a language of its own. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice soft, almost vulnerable. "I do not understand this feeling inside me," she admitted, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. "I should hate you, and yet I do not know what I feel." Mato stepped closer, keeping his distance respectful, his eyes searching hers. "Feelings are not always simple," he said gently. "They do not always follow the rules we expect. Grief and anger can exist alongside hope and connection." He hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. "You do not have to name it yet. You only have to feel it, and that is enough." Emma looked away, her heart pounding, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and longing. And in that moment, standing on the ridge with the plain stretched out endlessly before them, she realized something she had not allowed herself to admit. She wanted him in her life, not just as a helper or a stranger, but as something more. The wind carried a whisper across the snow-covered fields, and for the first time since her father's death, Emma felt that the future might hold more than pain. It might hold connection, understanding, and even love, though fragile, complicated, and uncertain. And as she rode back toward the cabin, Mato following at a respectful distance, Emma knew that their story was only beginning. The past had shaped them, loss had tested them, and the plains had witnessed their pain. But the days ahead promised something different: the chance to heal, the chance to discover trust, and the delicate possibility of a bond that could survive even the harshest storms of life. Winter had settled fully across the plains. Frost painted the branches of trees in silver, and the morning air carried a sharp, biting chill that made Emma pull her coat tighter around her shoulders. The ranch, normally alive with the sounds of animals and work, had grown quieter, slower, as the season forced both humans and creatures to adapt. Yet despite the cold, Emma felt an unexpected warmth growing inside her. It was subtle at first, a flicker she tried to deny, but it became impossible to ignore. Mato's presence had grown constant, a shadow that followed her across the frozen fields, steady and unyielding. She still remembered the first time she had felt that pull, when his eyes had met hers on the ridge, and everything inside her had shifted. At first, She had called it curiosity, or perhaps a faint recognition of a kindred spirit. But over weeks, she had come to know it for something more complicated, a mixture of longing, respect, and admiration that threatened to overwhelm the careful walls she had built around her heart. She hated herself for it sometimes, hating the betrayal of her feelings even as they stirred something she could not resist. The mornings were the hardest. Emma rose before sunrise, tending to the animals with precision, yet she always felt his eyes nearby. Sometimes he was helping with the horses, moving silently, almost like a shadow that had come to life. Other times he would wait at the edge of the field, watching her work with a patience that frustrated her. She wanted to ask him to stay closer, to speak, to touch, yet she also feared opening herself fully to someone who had been part of the tragedy in her life. One morning, the tension inside her could no longer be contained. She was mending a broken fence when she heard his voice behind her, low and calm. "Emma," he said. She spun around, feeling her heart leap against her chest. He was holding a bundle of firewood, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I thought you might need help," he said simply. Emma's hands, gripping the wooden post, trembled. "I don't need your help," she replied sharply, though her voice lacked the strength she wished it carried. She realized immediately that her words sounded harsher than she intended, but she could not stop the flood of emotion that came with his presence. Mato placed the wood down with care, close enough to help, but not so close as to invade her space. "You may not need it," he said softly, "but I want to offer it." There was no demand in his words, only an honest willingness, a gesture that spoke more than any explanation could. Emma looked at him, her chest tight, and realized that she had been searching for this. Someone who would stand by her side without forcing her. Someone who would be patient even when the world seemed unbearable. Days passed, and the routine became an unspoken dance. Emma would work on the ranch tasks while Mato assisted or remained nearby, their proximity growing without the need for words. She began to notice the little things. The way his hands moved with care, how he adjusted the horses' saddles with steady precision, how his gaze seemed to carry understanding rather than judgment. Her anger, though still present, softened, allowing glimpses of admiration and trust to grow in its place. One afternoon, the wind blew a biting chill across the prairie, and Emma found herself struggling to light the stove inside the cabin. Mato noticed from outside and stepped in, offering a gentle hand. "May I?" he asked, his eyes meeting hers with quiet reassurance. She hesitated, but the cold made her pause brief. He knelt beside the stove, his hands deft and sure, coaxing the fire to life. The warmth spread quickly, not just in the room, but in Emma's chest, a reminder that trust could be built in small, simple acts. That evening, as the cabin glowed with the light of the fire, Emma found herself sharing stories she had never told another living soul. Tales of her father's youth, of the first horse she had ever ridden, of moments of joy that had seemed insignificant but now felt sacred. Mato listened, never interrupting, never judging, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. There was an intimacy in that silence, a bond forged through shared space and quiet understanding that felt more powerful than any declaration of love could. Yet, even as warmth filled the cabin, Emma's heart carried a shadow. She could not forget the night her father had died, could not forget the way the world had shifted in an instant. Her feelings for Mato, though stirring, were complicated by grief and memory. She feared that acknowledging them would betray the man she had loved most in her life, her father. And yet, each time she looked at Mato, she felt a pull stronger than fear, a connection that seemed both impossible and inevitable. One particularly cold morning, a harsh wind rattled the windows and sent snowflakes swirling across the yard. Emma was struggling with a frozen water trough when Mato arrived, moving swiftly, his presence almost a comfort against the unforgiving cold. "Here," he said, handing her a sturdy rope. Together they worked in silence, their movements synchronized, almost instinctive. There was a rhythm to their cooperation, a sense of shared purpose that reminded Emma of the times she had worked with her father. When the task was done, she looked up at him, her breath forming small clouds in the air. "Why do you stay?" she asked quietly, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "Why do you stay when I cannot forgive completely?" Mato's eyes held a depth she could not fathom. "Because the world is larger than pain," he said. "Because I see what you are and I respect it. Because connection is possible even when the past is heavy. You are not just your grief, Emma. You are everything your father loved and more. I stay because I believe you deserve to have someone here, someone steady." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. The honesty in his voice, the weight of his words, shook her carefully constructed walls. For a long moment she could say nothing. The wind whistled around them, but in that space it felt as though time had slowed, allowing her to breathe, to understand and to feel. Days later, the first hints of thaw began to appear in the plains. Snow melted from the fences and trails, revealing the rich, dark soil beneath. Life on the ranch resumed with renewed energy, and Emma felt a similar stirring inside her. She was no longer consumed entirely by grief. She could smile, even if fleetingly. She could laugh, even if it felt strange after months of sorrow. And she found herself thinking of Mato not just as a presence in her life, but as a man she trusted and admired. Their companionship deepened in small, almost imperceptible ways. He would gather firewood without being asked. She would leave food for him by the cabin door, a silent acknowledgement of their growing bond. Conversations grew longer, laughter trickled into their interactions, and moments of quiet reflection became shared experiences rather than solitary escapes. Emma began to understand that love, even in its earliest forms, was not always loud or dramatic. It could be quiet, patient, and unwavering. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned shades of pink and purple, Mato asked Emma to ride with him to the ridge. The journey was slow, the snow soft beneath the horses' hooves, and the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. When they reached the top, the plain stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the golden light of dusk. Emma breathed in the cold, crisp air, feeling a strange sense of peace. She looked at Mato, whose profile was sharp against the fading sun, and realized that she was no longer afraid of her feelings. She could not yet name them, could not yet promise anything, but she felt them fully, without hesitation. "You are brave," Mato said quietly, his voice carrying across the wind. "Not because you fight the world, but because you face it, even with pain inside you. Your heart is strong and it does not close completely, even when life is cruel." Emma's chest tightened. I don't know what I feel," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I am angry and I know I am sad, but there is something else and I cannot stop it." Mato's eyes softened, reflecting the colors of the sky. "You do not need to understand it yet," he said. "Feel it and let it guide you. That is enough for now." As night fell over the plains, Emma and Mato rode back to the ranch together, side by side. The firelight from the cabin flickered in the distance, promising warmth, safety, and shared nights ahead. And as they returned, the wind carried a whisper across the fields, a whisper of beginnings, of trust slowly forming, and of a connection that neither could ignore. Emma knew that the road ahead would not be simple. The past would always be there, the memory of loss a shadow over every step. But for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe in something new. Something fragile, yes, but alive. Something that might, one day, grow into the love and trust she had thought forever lost. The plains were silent beneath the stars, but in the quiet, Emma felt a spark that promised change, understanding, and a bond that could endure even the harshest winters of life. Spring began to creep across the plains, softening the harshness of winter with tender shoots of green and the gentle trickle of melting snow. The air carried the scent of earth and new growth, and Emma could feel life stirring not just around her, but inside her as well. Each morning, the sun rose brighter, and with it came a sense of possibility she had not known since the night her father had died. The ranch was alive again. Cows grazed in the open fields, the horses neighed and stamped their hooves, and the creek gurgled with renewed energy. Emma moved through her day with purpose, yet her heart was lighter. She noticed the small joys again, the warmth of the sun on her face, the smooth leather of a well-worn saddle, the sound of birdsong carrying across the plains. And Mato was there always, a steady presence that had become as familiar as the land itself. They had grown comfortable with each other in ways neither could fully explain. Work on the ranch became a partnership. Emma would mend fences, and Mato would assist without question. She would ride the trails alone at first, but more often than not, he would ride beside her, silent, respectful, patient. It was a rhythm born from trust, forged in quiet moments rather than dramatic gestures. And with each passing day, Emma's heart softened, allowing space for something she had long denied, the beginnings of love. One afternoon, as the sky turned a deep, cloudless blue, Emma and Mato found themselves at the edge of the creek. The water sparkled under the sunlight, reflecting the clouds and the trees along the banks. Emma had been trying to repair a small section of the fence, but the task proved difficult with the damp ground and stubborn posts. Mato knelt beside her, guiding her hands with patience. "Try lifting from here," he said, his voice gentle, steady. "Use the strength of your legs, not just your arms." Emma followed his instructions, and to her surprise, the post moved with ease. She looked at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you," she said softly. Her eyes met his, and in them, she saw an understanding that words could never convey. There was no rush, no pressure, only presence. And in that presence, something fragile and precious began to bloom. The days passed, each carrying small moments that wove their lives closer together. Emma found herself laughing more, her smile coming easily and without effort. She told Mato stories about her childhood, about misadventures with her father, about the animals that had been her companions in lonely hours. And Mato listened, never interrupting, offering only a quiet warmth that made her feel safe. Yet even as trust and affection grew, there were moments when the past returned, sharp and uninvited. Memories of the night her father had died sometimes came rushing back, and Emma would feel the old anger flare up, threatening to undo all that had grown between them. On those days she avoided Mato, riding alone through the fields or working in silence, determined to keep the pain from spilling over. Mato, patient as ever, never forced her to speak. He understood that some wounds could not be healed with words alone. Instead, he would stay nearby, quietly tending the ranch, giving her space while offering silent support. It was a kind of love that demanded nothing, yet offered everything. A love built on respect and understanding rather than possession or expectation. One evening, as the sun sank behind the distant hills and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Mato approached Emma with 2 saddlebags slung over his shoulder. "I thought we could ride to the ridge," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "There is something I want you to see." Emma hesitated, the familiar pang of fear mingling with curiosity. She had begun to trust him, yes, but the memory of loss still lingered, a shadow she could not ignore. And yet, something in his gaze told her that this ride would not be ordinary. It would be a step forward, a bridge over the distance that grief had created. They rode in silence, the wind carrying the scents of the plains and the budding trees. The horses moved in unison, their hooves pressing softly into the earth. Emma felt a sense of anticipation she had not experienced in years, a flutter of hope that seemed to rise from the land itself. And when they reached the ridge, the view stole her breath. The plain stretched endlessly, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. Wildflowers had begun to bloom, scattering color across the fields in gentle waves. The river sparkled like silver, winding its way through the landscape. Emma felt a sense of awe, as if she were seeing the world anew, not just with her eyes but with her heart. Mato dismounted and stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "The land is alive," he said quietly. "And so are we, if we allow ourselves to be." His words were simple, yet they carried a depth that resonated within her. Emma realized in that moment that she had begun to allow herself, to allow trust, to allow hope, to allow affection to grow where fear and grief had once dominated. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can fully forgive yet," she admitted. "But I want to try. I want to see what life could be, even if it is complicated." Mato's eyes softened, and for the first time he reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. It was a touch that carried no demand, no expectation, only presence and reassurance. "That is enough," he said simply. "We take it one step at a time. There is no need to rush." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains. Emma felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet strength that had been absent for too long. She realized that trust and love were not about forgetting the past, but about learning to live with it, to honor it, and to allow new joys to grow alongside it. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened further. Emma began to confide in Mato about her dreams, the ones she had shelved after her father's death. She spoke of traveling beyond the plains, of learning more about the land and the animals she loved, of the small ambitions she had once thought impossible. Mato listened, offering encouragement without judgment, and sometimes sharing his own stories of his childhood, of the challenges his people had faced, of the lessons he had learned in a world that demanded resilience. Their conversations often stretched into the evenings, the stars appearing one by one as the sky deepened into midnight blue. Emma discovered that she could speak freely with him, revealing fears and hopes she had hidden from everyone else. And in return, Mato shared parts of himself he had never spoken aloud, trusting her with fragments of a life shaped by history, hardship, and survival. One afternoon, as the first warm winds of spring blew across the fields, Emma and Mato found themselves repairing a section of the barn roof. The sun beat down on their backs, and sweat mingled with laughter as they worked side by side. At one point, Emma slipped on a loose plank and Mato's hands shot out instinctively to steady her. Their eyes met, and for a long, suspended moment, words were unnecessary. The trust, the connection, the quiet affection between them was palpable. Emma felt a flutter in her chest she could no longer ignore. Her body responded to his presence, her heart beat faster, and a warmth spread through her that was entirely new. Yet she did not fear it as she once might have. She understood now that this feeling was not betrayal, but life returning to her in a form she had never expected. As the days grew longer and the nights warmer, the bond between Emma and Mato became undeniable. They shared meals, stories, and silences, each moment strengthening the trust and affection that had begun as fragile threads. And though the memory of loss remained, it no longer dictated the course of her heart. Instead, it existed alongside a growing hope, a sense that life, even after tragedy, could offer connection, joy, and even love. One evening, as fireflies danced across the fields and the stars sparkled overhead, Emma realized she was no longer afraid to imagine a future with Mato. She did not know what it would look like, or how long it might take to heal fully, but she felt certain that they would face it together. And in that certainty, she found a strength and peace she had not thought possible. The plains stretched endlessly beneath the night sky, quiet yet alive, holding witness to a bond forged through grief, patience, and the quiet courage to trust. And as Emma stood beside Mato, feeling the steady warmth of his presence, she knew that the story of loss and longing was giving way to a new chapter, one of hope, connection, and a love that had grown slowly, carefully, and impossibly strong. The warmth of spring had fully settled. Over the plains, Wildflowers waved in the gentle breeze, and the air smelled of fresh earth, growth, and new beginnings. Emma woke each morning to the soft light of dawn spilling into the cabin, the sound of birdsong mingling with the low murmurs of the ranch animals. Life, once a series of shadows and sorrow, had begun to feel full again. Mato had become a constant in her days, his presence no longer a source of tension or confusion, but of comfort and trust. They moved through the routines of the ranch together, side by side, their rhythm unspoken yet precise. He helped her tend the animals, repair fences, and manage the land, always careful to respect her space while remaining a steady presence. And in the quiet moments, when their work was done and the sun sank behind the distant hills, they would sit together, sharing stories or simply watching the plains stretch endlessly before them. The bond between them had grown slowly, like the gentle rise of green across the winter-bare fields, fragile at first but strengthening with each passing day. Emma had learned to trust him fully, to rely on his guidance, and to allow herself to feel emotions she had long denied: hope, affection, and a budding love that was patient, tender, and steady. One morning, she found herself standing at the edge of the creek, the water sparkling as it wound its way through the valley. Mato approached quietly, his horse moving with the ease and silence of someone who knew the land intimately. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and calm. Emma smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest she could no longer suppress. "Good morning," she replied. She hesitated for a moment, then added softly, I've been thinking about everything." Mato dismounted, brushing snow and dirt from his boots, and stood beside her. "And what have you decided?" he asked, his eyes meeting hers with a steady intensity that made her heart beat faster. "I've decided," she said carefully, "that the past will always be part of me. The loss of my father, the pain I felt, it shaped who I am, but it does not have to define my future." Her gaze fell to the water, shimmering with sunlight. "I want to live, truly live, and I want to trust again. I want to allow myself to love." Mato's expression softened, and he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle reverence. "Then we will face it together," he said. "Step by step, moment by moment. We do not need to rush. We only need to be present with each other." The days that followed were filled with quiet joys. They worked together on the ranch from sunrise to sunset, their movements fluid, almost instinctive. Emma found herself laughing freely again, feeling the spark of life in ways she had not thought possible. And Mato, in turn, shared more of himself, the stories of his people, the lessons learned from a life of hardship, the small, tender memories of family and friends who had shaped him. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of the barn roof together, Emma slipped on a loose plank. Mato caught her instinctively, his hands steady and reassuring. Their eyes met, and for a long, suspended moment, the world seemed to fade away. Emma felt a warmth spread through her, a certainty that this was where she belonged, not just on the ranch, not just in this life, but beside him. That evening they sat by the cabin fire, the flames flickering across their faces. Emma held a cup of tea in her hands, feeling the heat seep into her palms and her heart. "I never thought I would feel happy again," she admitted, her voice quiet but full of emotion. "After everything, I didn't think it was possible." Mato reached out, taking her hand in his. "Happiness has always been possible," he said softly. "It just takes time and the courage to allow it in. You have that courage, Emma. You have always had it." Her chest tightened with emotion, and for the first time she allowed herself to fully accept it. She leaned slightly into his hand, the warmth of his touch spreading through her like sunlight across the plains. She no longer felt the sharp ache of grief as a weight to carry alone. Instead, it had softened, becoming a quiet memory that honored her father while allowing space for new life, new love. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, Emma and Mato's bond deepened. They shared the rhythm of ranch life, the quiet laughter of shared jokes, the long rides through the hills, and the tender moments by the riverbank. They began to talk openly about the future, not just what they would do tomorrow, but what they hoped for in years to come. Dreams that had seemed distant, impossible, or even foolish now felt achievable because they would face them together. One particularly warm afternoon, Emma found herself atop the ridge, the plains stretching endlessly before her. Mato stood beside her, silent, but she could feel his steady presence as if it were an extension of her own heartbeat. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass, and the sky was a brilliant shade of blue. "I've been thinking," Emma said softly, her voice barely rising above the whisper of the wind. Mato turned to her, eyes attentive. "I've been thinking about the future, about what life could be, not just surviving but truly living, and I want you to be part of it. Not just as someone I trust, but as someone I love." Mato's eyes softened, and a small, tender smile curved his lips. "And I," he said, his voice calm but full of feeling, "want nothing more than to be part of your life. To stand beside you, to share the joys and the challenges, to honor the past and embrace what comes next." The moment stretched, filled with unspoken understanding and a quiet certainty that their hearts had long sought. Emma felt a tear slip down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of relief, gratitude, and love. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt whole. Over the following days, they began to plan small steps for their shared future. They spoke of improving the ranch together, tending the land as her father had once dreamed, and ensuring the animals thrived under their care. They dreamed of traveling beyond the plains, seeing the rivers, hills, and forests that stretched far beyond the horizon. And they spoke of the simple things, the quiet evenings by the fire, the laughter of friends, the comfort of shared mornings. Spring continued to bloom, the land alive with possibility, and Emma found herself moving through it with a new sense of freedom. The grief that had once consumed her no longer held her captive. Instead, it had transformed into a quiet respect for the life she had shared with her father, and a readiness to embrace life anew. And at the center of that transformation stood Mato, patient, steady, and unwavering. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Emma and Mato rode together along the ridge. Their horses moved in harmony, the soft sound of hooves blending with the whisper of the wind. They paused at a familiar spot overlooking the plains, the world spread out in endless beauty before them. Emma leaned slightly against Mato, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I never imagined life could feel like this," she whispered, "that it could be full of hope, trust, and even love again." Mato rested his hand on hers, a silent promise that he would remain by her side. "Life is full of surprises," he said gently, "and sometimes the most unexpected moments bring the greatest gifts. You have opened your heart, Emma. You have allowed life and love to return, and that is a courage few possess." She looked out over the plains, the wind tousling her hair, the fading sunlight bathing the hills in warmth. And in that moment, she understood that love was not about forgetting, nor was it about denying pain. Love was about standing together, facing the future, and allowing the heart to heal even after the deepest sorrow. As night fell and stars appeared like scattered diamonds across the sky, Emma and Mato rode back to the ranch, side by side. The cabin glowed with the promise of warmth and shared nights ahead, and the land around them whispered of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of connection. Emma knew the road ahead would not be without challenges. Life could be unpredictable, and the plains could be harsh. But she also knew that with Mato by her side, she could face whatever came. Together, they had found trust, they had nurtured hope, and they had allowed love to grow, slowly and carefully, into something beautiful and lasting. And as they entered the cabin, the fire crackling warmly, Emma felt a peace she had not known in years. The past remained a part of her, but it no longer ruled her heart. Instead, the present was alive with possibility, and the future glimmered with promise. Together, Emma and Mato would face it all, side by side, hearts intertwined, and a love that had grown from sorrow into something strong, enduring, and real. The plains were quiet beneath the night sky, but within the cabin and within their hearts, life was alive, love was growing, and hope had returned. And in that quiet certainty, Emma knew that she was finally home, not just on the land she had always loved, but in the arms of a man who had become her anchor, her companion, and her heart's truest companion.